I still remember that night like it just happened. It was 2 a.m. and I woke up to the sound of running water. At first, I thought maybe a pipe had burst or my son couldn't sleep again. But then it happened the next night. And the next. Always at exactly 2 a.m. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was nothing. But curiosity and fear are strange neighbors. They live inside your chest, whispering louder each night. So one night I got up. I walked down the hallway barefoot, cold floor under my feet. The sound was clearer now, steady, almost rhythmic. And when I pushed the bathroom door open just a little, what I saw inside froze me where I stood. That moment changed everything. The way I saw my son, the way I saw myself, and what I believed about love and safety. The next morning, I packed my bags and left that house forever. I can still hear the sound of water at night. It's strange how memory works, how some sounds stay with you long after they stop echoing. In this quiet nursing home room, surrounded by people who barely remember their own names, I still remember that one sound, the steady rush of water, like a heartbeat that refused to die. On the small table beside me, my journal lies open under the warm yellow light. The first line reads, "There are still nights when I hear the water, but this time it doesn't scare me anymore." Outside, Boston is asleep. Snow drifts gently across the window glass, and the city hums softly below, a hum I've grown used to. But it wasn't always like this. Peace, for me, never came easily. A year ago, I was still in Vermont, in the old wooden house my late husband built, the kind of place that creaked when the wind blew, that smelled of pine and thyme. I used to think I'd die there, quietly, alone, tending my tomato plants and pretending the silence was peace. That winter was colder than usual, the kind of cold that bites through sweaters and memories alike. I remember packing boxes, not because I was moving, but because I couldn't stand seeing his things anymore. The hammer still hanging in the shed, his heavy boots by the door, his voice still echoing somewhere in the corners of the house. My husband had been dead for years, but the fear he left behind never really went away. People talk about ghosts like they're spirits that haunt you, but the real ghosts are the habits, the way you flinch at loud voices, the way your body remembers before your mind does. That night, as I wrapped another photo frame in old newspaper, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Hardly anyone called me anymore. "Mom," a familiar voice said. "It's me, Michael." My heart softened immediately. "Michael, how are you, honey?" He didn't waste time on small talk. "Mom, listen. Claire and I have been talking. We think it's time you moved to the city. You shouldn't be alone out there. I'll come pick you up this weekend." I laughed, though my throat tightened. "Oh, Michael, that's kind of you. But I'm fine here. I have my garden, my neighbors. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," he said, but his tone carried that old sharp edge I remembered from his father. "It's a son's duty to take care of his mother. You shouldn't argue." The way he said it made something deep inside me shrink. That same old instinct, quiet, fearful, obedient. I wanted to argue, to say I didn't need anyone, but my words froze. Then Clara's voice came through, soft and careful. "Mom, please come stay with us. The apartment is big, and Michael worries about you all the time. It'll be nice to have you here. I'll take care of everything." Clara was always kind. Too kind sometimes. Her voice was like a warm blanket laid over ice, gentle but fragile. I looked around the room. The walls carried decades of laughter and shouting. The wooden floor still bore scratches from the night I tried to run. Maybe, I thought, it was time to leave. "All right," I said finally, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. "Just give me a few days to pack." After the call ended, the silence of the house felt heavier than before. I turned off the light and sat on the bed, watching my breath turn white in the cold air. Leaving meant freedom, but it also meant stepping into the unknown. I didn't know what kind of life waited for me in Boston. I didn't know what kind of man my son had become. Somewhere in the distance, a pipe creaked, and for a moment I thought I heard water running. The sound made my heart race before I even realized it. I told myself it was nothing, just the old plumbing again. But deep down, I knew that sound. It was the same rhythm, the same tone, as all those nights long ago when I sat in the dark, listening to the bathroom tap run after my husband's rage had quieted. The sound of water washing away guilt, washing away blood, washing away everything except fear. I pressed my palms together and whispered to myself, "It's over. That life is over." But even then, some part of me, the part that never stopped listening, didn't believe it. The next morning, I folded my husband's old flannel shirt and placed it neatly in a box. Outside, snow was falling harder now, covering everything in white. My small town of Maplewood was quiet, like it was holding its breath. When Michael's car arrived that weekend, sleek, black, and new, I felt a mix of pride and unease. My son had made something of himself. He looked strong, confident, untouchable. As he stepped out, smiling, his voice carried across the cold air. "Come on, Mom. Time to go home." I looked at the house one last time. The garden, the wooden fence, the ghosts I was leaving behind. I thought of my husband's voice, my son's voice, and how eerily alike they sometimes sounded. Then I whispered to myself, maybe this time, things will be different. I didn't know it yet, but I was wrong. That winter, I left one prison behind, only to walk quietly into another. The drive to Boston felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was the snow, or maybe it was the silence between me and my son. Michael was focused on the road, hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, not saying much. I tried to make small talk about the scenery, the frozen rivers, the endless white fields, but he only nodded, answering with short words. The closer we got to the city, the smaller I felt. The mountains of Vermont disappeared behind us, replaced by glass towers that caught the light like blades. The roads widened, the cars moved faster, and the people outside looked like shadows passing each other without seeing. When we stopped at a red light, I looked out the window. Billboards, neon signs, people wrapped in thick coats. The city was alive, but cold. Even the light here felt different, sharper, less forgiving. Michael glanced at me. "You'll like it here, Mom. Everything you need is right inside the building. Gym, grocery, even a doctor's office on the first floor. No need to go out in the cold anymore." He said it like a promise, but it felt like a rule. I smiled anyway. "That sounds convenient." He nodded once, satisfied, and kept driving. When we pulled up to Silver Heights, I had to catch my breath. The building stood tall and silent, all glass and steel, reflecting the sky like it wanted to hide behind it. The doorman greeted us politely, and Michael spoke to him by name, as if this place already knew who we were supposed to be. Inside, the elevator was lined with mirrors. I caught my own reflection next to my son's, his black coat, sharp jawline, calm expression. Beside him, I looked small, faded, almost see-through. 18th floor, he said. The doors closed, and I felt the quiet pressure of the elevator rising. Smooth, fast, controlled. When the doors opened, the first thing that hit me was the silence. No ticking clock, no creak of wood, no wind. Just stillness. Emily greeted me at the door. She smiled, a tired, practiced smile. "Mom, welcome home." Her hug was light, polite. She smelled like soap and something faintly floral, but under that was exhaustion. The apartment looked like a picture from a magazine. Wide windows, white furniture, everything perfectly placed, but it didn't feel lived in. It felt like a hotel room someone forgot to leave. "This is beautiful," I said honestly. "Michael likes things clean," Emily replied. Her voice was calm, but there was something behind it, a weight in the way she chose her words. Michael set my suitcase by the guest room. "You'll have everything you need here." I told Emily to clear the closet. I looked around. The room was spotless, perfectly arranged, too perfect. Not a single picture on the wall, not even a wrinkle on the bedspread. That night we had dinner together, my first in this new home. Emily had made soup. It smelled comforting, the kind of food that carries warmth into the body. "This looks wonderful," I said, taking my seat. Michael tasted it, frowned, then set his spoon down. "It needs salt." Emily hesitated. I followed the recipe. "Then the recipe's wrong," he said sharply. "Get the salt." I froze for a second, the tone, the pause. I'd heard it before from another man in another kitchen years ago. Emily stood up quietly, reached for the salt shaker, and adjusted the soup. Michael tasted it again, nodded slightly. "Better." The silence after that was heavy. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension. A joke, a compliment, a memory. But when I looked at my son, his face was calm, expressionless, and his eyes were cold. The words died in my throat. Dinner ended quickly. Michael went to his study to take a call. Emily started washing dishes, her hands moving fast, her shoulders tense. I offered to help, but she shook her head. "It's fine, Mom. You should rest. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The city lights blinked through the tall windows like distant stars. Everything was clean, quiet, modern, and yet something about it felt suffocating. I listened to the hum of the elevator, the wind outside, the faint sound of traffic far below. Then, just as my eyes began to close, I heard it. Water running. At first, I thought it was from another apartment, someone taking a late shower. But the sound was close, too close. A steady, rhythmic flow. I turned my head toward the bathroom door down the hall. The sound didn't stop. It came and went like breathing. Calm, deliberate. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands tightened on the blanket. My chest felt cold. It's nothing, I whispered to myself. Just the pipes, just the pipes. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. There was nothing leaking in that apartment except something far more human. That night, I closed my eyes and listened until the water stopped. And in the quiet that followed, I realized peace had never followed me here. It had only changed its address. The morning after the first night, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of Silver Heights. The city outside was already awake, cars moving below like tiny beetles, the air sharp and cold. The apartment, however, felt unnaturally still. I sat at the breakfast table, trying to act as if nothing had happened. Emily was at the stove, quietly stirring oatmeal. Michael sat across from me, his tablet in one hand, scrolling through emails. He looked rested. Too rested. I cleared my throat lightly. You couldn't sleep last night, could you? He didn't look up. What makes you say that? I heard water running around too, I said. I tried to keep my tone gentle, just a mother's concern. Were you feeling okay? He smiled, that calm, distant smile he always had when he didn't want to be questioned. Just stress, Mom. Work's been heavy. A shower helps me sleep. A shower? At 2 a.m. I forced a smile back, nodding like it made sense. Maybe don't make it a habit, I said softly. Cold water at night isn't good for the heart. He chuckled, finally glancing up. I'm fine, Mom. You worry too much. The spoon slipped from Emily's hand. A small clink, barely noticeable, but in that perfect, quiet kitchen, it sounded like an alarm. She bent quickly to pick it up, mumbling something about being clumsy. Michael didn't react. He kept scrolling. But I saw it, the tiny tremor in Emily's hand as she wiped the oatmeal splatter from the counter. Her fingers were thin, pale, and cracked from the cold. The skin around her knuckles looked raw. I wanted to ask if she was all right, but the words caught in my throat. Michael's presence filled the room like a wall, invisible but impossible to pass through. Breakfast went on in silence. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator, the quiet scrape of spoons against bowls, and the click of Michael's tablet screen. I tried to focus on the sunlight spilling across the marble floor. It was beautiful, soft, golden, warm. But even that light couldn't touch the chill in the room. When Michael left for work, the door closed with a gentle but heavy thud. Emily exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath. Do you want more tea, Mom? She asked quickly. Her voice was polite, light, too light. I smiled faintly. No, thank you, dear. Her hands shook slightly as she gathered the dishes. She avoided my eyes, focusing on the sink, scrubbing longer than needed. The sound of water again filled the air, running, steady, repetitive. I stood quietly watching her back. For a moment I thought she was crying. Her shoulders trembled and her breath came in quick, uneven bursts. But when she turned around, her face was calm. Tired, but calm. You should rest, Mom, she said again. You've had a long trip. I nodded, though I didn't move. That sound, the water hitting metal, the rhythm of it, felt too familiar. I pressed my palm against my chest. My heartbeat had started to race again. That afternoon, I tried to take a nap, but the sound wouldn't leave me. Even in silence, it was there, in the pipes, in the walls, echoing faintly under the hum of the city. Every few minutes, I thought I heard it again. A faint trickle, a sudden burst, then stillness. I told myself it was the plumbing, the high floors, the old pipes, but deep down, I knew better. You can tell when water runs to clean, and when it runs to wash something away. That night, I sat by the window. The city lights glowed below like a sea of tiny fires. I watched people moving through their lives, laughing, rushing, unaware of what went on in the quiet places above. From somewhere down the hall, I heard the faint sound again, The same steady rush, water hitting tile. I closed my eyes. My hands tightened around the blanket in my lap. The sound pulsed through the walls, slow and deliberate, like a memory replaying itself. And then, just like before, it stopped. Not fading, stopping sharply, as if someone had turned off a switch. The next morning, I found Emily in the kitchen early. Her hair was tied up neatly, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. There were faint shadows under her eyes, a kind of exhaustion that makeup couldn't hide. She smiled when she saw me. "Morning, Mom. Did you sleep well?" "I did," I lied. "And you?" She hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then she nodded. "Fine." I watched her hands as she poured coffee. The same hands I'd seen trembling yesterday. The same thin, fragile wrists. Something in me wanted to reach across the counter, to hold those hands, to ask what really kept her up at night. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I just said, "You make the best coffee, dear." She smiled again, but her eyes didn't. That night, when the clock struck 2 again, I was already awake. I didn't even know why. My heart was beating too fast, my palms damp. Then, like clockwork, the sound returned. The water. It flowed steady through the wall, filling the silence of the apartment. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It was the kind of sound you felt more than heard, the kind that traveled straight into your chest. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening. The city outside was quiet. Inside, the water kept running, and somewhere deep inside me, in the part of me that still remembered fear, something whispered, "This isn't stress. This isn't plumbing." I turned toward the wall and listened harder. Each drop felt heavier, closer, like it was echoing from inside me. I closed my eyes, trying to believe it was just the pipes. I would write later in my journal. But the truth was clear. Nothing was leaking here except humanity. It happened one quiet afternoon. Emily and I were in the kitchen together. She was chopping vegetables for dinner, and I was peeling apples at the table. The light from the window was soft and pale, the keen that makes everything look gentle. We talked about small things, the market nearby, the weather, how quickly the snow was melting. She smiled a few times, polite and distant, the way she always did when Michael wasn't home. She reached up to grab something from the upper cabinet. The sleeve of her loose blouse slipped down just for a second. That's when I saw it. 5 faint bruises, deep purple, fading yellow at the edges, wrapped around her wrist like a cruel bracelet. The shape was unmistakable. Not a fall, not an accident. Fingers. My breath caught. The apple slipped from my hand and rolled across the counter. Emily noticed. She froze for half a heartbeat, then pulled her sleeve down quickly, smiling like nothing happened. "Oh, I bumped into the cupboard yesterday," she said too fast. "Clumsy me." Her voice trembled slightly. She turned back to chopping. The knife hit the board in uneven beats. Tap, 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 like her hands couldn't stay steady. I couldn't answer. My tongue felt heavy. My body went cold. The sound of the knife hitting wood blurred with another sound in my head. Another kitchen, another life. Flashback. The yellow light from an old lamp. The smell of whiskey. My husband's hand gripping my wrist. Tight, unyielding, dragging me across the room. His voice sharp and slurred. "Don't you walk away when I'm talking to you." The bruise had looked the same back then. The same purple marks. The same burning skin under the surface. The same fear. I used to tell people the same lie. I slipped. I fell. I hit the table, and people used to nod, pretending to believe it, pretending not to see. Back in the present, Emily was still cooking. Her movements were careful now, almost mechanical. "Doesn't it smell nice, Mom?" she asked suddenly without turning around. I looked at her back, small, fragile, trembling slightly. "Yes," I said quietly. "It smells lovely." She smiled again, still facing away. "Michael likes it spicy. He says food tastes better with a little heat." Her words hung in the air. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reach out, to tell her I understood, to tell her I had lived this before. The fear, the hiding, the endless effort to make things seem normal. But my throat wouldn't open. Instead, I stood there, frozen, watching her back as she stirred the pot, the steam rising between us like a wall. Later, I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. I could still see the bruises when I closed my eyes. I remembered my own wrists, how they used to ache for days, how I would hide them under long sleeves even in summer. I remembered how I used to believe that silence was strength, That keeping peace meant keeping quiet, but as I stared at the blank wall in front of me, I realized something I hadn't before. I once believed silence kept a family together, I whispered. Now I know silence only feeds the monster. That evening, the apartment was quiet. Michael hadn't come home yet. Emily moved through the house like a shadow, tidying things that didn't need tidying, wiping already clean counters. I sat in the living room pretending to read, though the words on the page made no sense. I was listening, not for footsteps or doors, but for something else. And then it came. A faint sound from the bathroom down the hall. The sound of running water. It was early this time, not 2 a.m, not even close. But the sound was the same steady rush, soft but relentless, crawling under my skin. I stood up. My knees felt weak. Emily was standing by the sink, drying her hands. She glanced toward the hallway, her expression empty, distant, like someone who had already left her body. "Michael will be home soon," she said quietly. "He likes the water hot when he showers." Her voice broke slightly on the word hot. She turned away before I could respond, retreating into the kitchen. I stood there, staring at the closed bathroom door. The water kept running. The sound was rhythmic, not angry, not violent, just constant, like someone washing away something invisible, like a drumbeat from another life. My heart began to pound in the same rhythm. I pressed my back against the wall, closing my eyes. For a moment, I was back in Vermont, in that wooden house. I could smell the cold air, the whiskey, the soap. I could hear my husband breathing heavily after one of his rages. Then the sound of water, always water, washing his hands, his face, his sins. And now, in the city apartment, the same sound returned. Not from the past, from the next room. I opened my eyes. My reflection stared back from the dark window. Older, thinner, trembling. For a second, I thought I saw both of them there. My husband behind one shoulder, my son behind the other. The same eyes, the same silence. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the water stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than noise. It pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. Somewhere deep inside me, I felt a door open, not in the house, but in my memory. And from behind it came everything I'd tried to forget. The shouting, the begging, the bruises that never really faded, and the sound of water, steady, cleansing, merciless, running through all of it. That night, the sound was different, louder, sharper. Not the faint hum I'd grown used to. This time, it hit like a wave. I woke up instantly, my eyes snapped open in the dark, heart thudding fast. The clock on the nightstand glowed 2 a.m. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd been dreaming again. But then I heard it, water pounding against tile, steady and violent, as if someone had turned the faucet all the way open. I sat up listening. It wasn't just the sound of water anymore. There were other noises underneath it, a dull thud, a gasp, a voice, low, furious, muffled by the running water. I slipped out of bed. My bare feet touched the cold floor, and the chill shot up my legs. I hesitated, my body moving before my mind could stop it. The hallway was dim. Only the small light above the bathroom door glowed, white, sterile, cutting through the dark like a blade. The sound grew louder with every step. I stopped when I reached the door. The crack beneath it glowed faintly, and through it came the spray of water, constant, merciless. Then I heard his voice, Michael's. "You make me look like a fool," he shouted. The words were thick, shaking with rage. "You make me the bad guy, Emily. You think you're better than me?" I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Through the narrow gap of the door, I saw movement. A blur of wet fabric, a flash of a pale arm, water splashing against the walls. "Michael," I almost said his name aloud. But no sound came out. Inside, his voice rose again, deeper, more desperate. "You think I want to be like this? You make me like this." The water struck tile in a hard rhythm, echoing like whips in the confined space. I forced myself closer, my hands trembling. I leaned slightly toward the door, just enough to see through the crack. And then I saw them. Emily was on the bathroom floor, her clothes drenched, hair plastered to her face. The shower sprayed full force from above, soaking everything. She tried to shield her face with her arms, but Michael held her down with one hand, pressing her shoulders beneath the icy torrent. Her body shook, not from struggle, but from cold and terror. Michael's face was twisted with fury. Water ran down his neck, soaking his shirt. His eyes looked wild, unrecognizable. "You made me this way," he yelled again. "You turned me into a monster." His hand rose, and then came the sound, sharp and quick, a slap, then another. Emily didn't scream. Only a broken whimper left her lips. The water drowned everything else, the gasps, the sobs, the small sounds of pain. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My legs felt locked in place. My hands covered my mouth before I even realized it. The air smelled of soap and metal. I could feel the mist from the open crack hitting my face, cold and clean. Too clean. And in that mist, time folded. Flashback, Vermont. The yellow light above the sink flickering. The smell of whiskey again. My husband's voice, low, calm, cruel. "You cry too much, Helen. Let's see if cold water clears your head." Then, splash. Ice-cold water hitting my face, my hair, my eyes. His hand gripping my jaw. "Look at me when I talk to you," he hissed. "Don't you dare look away." I remembered the sting of it, not just the cold, but the humiliation, the taste of fear mixing with soap and salt. The silence afterward when I'd sit on the floor, dripping and shaking, pretending I wasn't broken. The water back then had always sounded the same, unforgiving, endless. Now, in this hallway in Boston, decades later, the same sound filled my ears. My son's voice, my husband's voice, they blended until I couldn't tell them apart. "Michael," I whispered, barely a breath. "Stop." But he didn't hear me. Or maybe he couldn't. Emily's body went limp for a moment under his grip. He finally let go. She slid to the side, crumpled, her breathing shallow, the water still pouring over her. Michael stood there, chest heaving, staring at her. Then he turned the faucet off. Silence crashed into the room, louder than the water had been. He leaned against the wall, hands covering his face. "Look what you make me do," he whispered, "every time." I backed away slowly, my hand against the wall to steady myself. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, to burst in, to pull her out, to scream his name. But I didn't. I couldn't. My body moved on instinct, the same instinct that had kept me alive years ago. Stay quiet, don't provoke, survive. I stumbled back into my room and shut the door softly behind me. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor. The apartment was silent again, except for the faint drip of water through the pipes. One drop at a time, like the ticking of a slow, cruel clock. Tears came without sound. I pressed my fist against my mouth to keep from sobbing. I could see it all. Emily's shaking body, the water splashing across the tiles, Michael's face twisted with anger. And behind it all, another image. My husband, younger, stronger, his eyes blazing in the same way. My mind couldn't separate them anymore. I thought the monsters of my past had died. I would write later. But monsters don't die. They just grow up, change their names, and call you Mom. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window until dawn, my hands still shaking, my breath shallow. When the first light touched the city, I could still hear it. The echo of running water, soft and steady, like guilt knocking on the walls of my heart. Morning came quietly, as if the world itself was afraid to make a sound. The city outside the window was washed in pale light, thin, colorless, fragile. I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase open beside me. One by one, I folded my clothes, slow and deliberate. My hands moved out of habit, but my mind was somewhere else, still standing in that hallway, still hearing the rush of water pounding against tile. The faint scent of coffee drifted in from the kitchen. Michael was already awake. He had always been like that, efficient, precise, in control. When I stepped out of my room, he was at the dining table, dressed sharply as ever, scrolling through his phone. Emily stood by the sink, her back to us, her hair perfectly brushed, her blouse covering the bruises I now knew were there. "Morning, Mom," Michael said, his voice calm, steady, like the night before hadn't happened. "You're up early." "I thought I'd do some packing," I replied, my tone careful, measured. He frowned. "Packing? For what?" I took a slow breath. "I think I'll move to St. Anne's, the retirement home near the park." He set down his phone, his smile tightening at the corners. "You don't need to do that, Mom. You have everything here. Comfort, family. You shouldn't be alone." His words were kind, too kind. They sat heavy in the air, forced and hollow. He walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're safe here. Don't worry about a thing." The weight of his hand made my skin crawl. I managed a small smile. "I know, Michael. I just need space. Fresh air." He looked at me for a moment longer, searching my face for something. Maybe doubt, maybe fear. When he didn't find either, he nodded once and stepped back. If that's what you want, I'll arrange a driver. Emily still hadn't spoken. Her hands were shaking slightly as she poured coffee into a mug. I looked at her, hoping she would glance back, meet my eyes, give me some silent sign that she wanted me to stay, or to take her with me, but she didn't. She kept her gaze low, lips pressed tight, body small. For a brief second I thought I saw a tear fall into the coffee she was pouring, but maybe it was just the reflection of the light. I zipped my suitcase and carried it toward the door. The sound of the zipper felt final, like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. Michael helped me with my coat, all smiles again, the perfect son seeing his mother off. "Don't worry about anything," he said almost cheerfully. "You can visit whenever you want. We'll come by this weekend." Emily finally turned around, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Take care, Mom," she whispered. Her voice trembled on the last word. I reached out and touched her arm. It was cold, tense under my hand. "You too, dear," I said softly. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, long enough for me to see the fear hiding behind her. Politeness. It was the same look I'd seen in my own mirror 30 years ago. Then Michael opened the door, and the moment was gone. In the elevator, I stood alone with my suitcase. The metallic hum of the cables echoed faintly in the narrow space. The mirror walls reflected my image from every side. One woman multiplied, fragmented, distorted. My face looked older than I remembered, the lines deeper, the color drained. The lights flickered once, and for a brief moment the reflection seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. I blinked. The illusion held for a second longer, and it felt as though the mirror was melting, pouring down the walls in thin silver streams. I whispered under my breath, the words barely audible. I thought I had left hell behind. But maybe I only changed its address. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Outside, the air was cool and dry. The car waited by the curb, engine running. I climbed in and watched as the tall glass towers of Silver Heights receded behind me, their mirrored surfaces catching the pale sun. From a distance, the building looked beautiful, all light and symmetry, but I knew better now. Behind those windows, behind the spotless glass, the water still ran. The drive to St. Anne's took less than an hour, but it felt much longer. The farther we moved from the city, the more the sky seemed to soften. The noise faded, replaced by the quiet hum of open roads and the occasional call of a bird. When we arrived, the light had changed. No longer white and sharp, but warm, golden, like honey spread across the walls. The retirement home stood modestly on a hill, surrounded by trees beginning to turn yellow at the tips. A nurse greeted me at the entrance. She smiled kindly, helped me with my bag, and led me inside. The air smelled faintly of soap and lilies. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear a piano. Slow, uneven notes, someone practicing. I walked behind her, my footsteps echoing softly on the floor. Each sound felt lighter, as if the air itself was forgiving. She opened the door to my new room, small, clean, with a window facing the garden. The light spilling through the glass was the color of late afternoon. I set my suitcase down and sat by the window. The chair creaked softly beneath me. Outside, I could see people walking, talking quietly, living gently. For the first time in weeks, there was no sound of water, only silence. And then, faintly, from somewhere deep inside my mind, not from fear, but from memory, I heard the echo again, softer now, like a whisper instead of a scream. "There are nights when I still hear the water," I would later write in my journal, but this time it no longer frightens me. The light shifted slowly from white to amber. Day faded into evening, and for the first time in a long while I allowed myself to breathe. The garden at St. Anne's was quiet that morning. A thin layer of frost covered the benches, and the old maple trees stood bare against the sky. The air smelled faintly of snow and distant pine. I often came here after breakfast to sit near the fountain that no longer worked. It had frozen weeks ago, but I liked the silence it held. That day, as I sat by the garden path, I heard a voice behind me, calm, low, and strangely familiar. "Helen Gardner? Is that really you?" I turned. For a moment, I couldn't place her. The years had carved lines on her face, but the eyes, warm, steady, curious, hadn't changed. "Margaret Bloom," I whispered, my heart tightening. "I can't believe it." She smiled, walking toward me, bundled in a heavy coat with a wool scarf tucked at her neck. "I thought that was you, the same quiet posture. You always sat near the window in class, do you remember?" I laughed softly, surprised by how easily her presence reached me. "I remember," I said. "You were the one who always had the answers before the teacher finished asking." We both chuckled, though there was a tremor beneath it, the kind that comes when two people recognize they've survived too much to laugh freely anymore. We walked slowly through the garden path until we reached a wooden bench beneath the old oak tree. The wind had picked up, whistling through the branches like an echo of time passing. Margaret brushed a thin layer of frost from the seat before sitting down. "It's strange," she said, looking out over the frozen pond. "You spend your youth trying to get out into the world, and then somehow we all end up in places like this, sitting still, listening to the wind." I smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what peace looks like." She shook her head. "Peace," she repeated softly. "Or penance." Her tone changed. It grew quieter, heavier, the kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. "My daughter Leah," she said suddenly. "You remember her? She used to visit me when I first moved here." I nodded slowly. "Of course. She was beautiful. A teacher, wasn't she?" Margaret's gaze stayed fixed on the trees. "She was. Smart, patient, the kind of girl who saw good in everyone, especially the wrong ones." Her fingers tightened around the edge of her scarf. "She married a man who smiled too easily and talked too softly, the kind of man people trust because his voice never rises. I trusted him too." The wind howled faintly, carrying her words into the cold air. "One night, she called me," Margaret continued. Her voice was trembling. "She said she'd fallen, that she'd hit her head on the stairs. I told her to rest. I told her to be careful. I didn't ask who pushed her." She fell silent for a long time. Only the sound of the wind filled the gap, steady, mournful. "The next morning," she said finally, "the police came. They said it was an accident, that she slipped. The stairs were wet." Her voice cracked just slightly, but she didn't cry. "They wrote accident on the report. But I knew. I knew she didn't fall from the stairs. She fell from my silence." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not loud, not sharp, but deep. Like something that sinks into your chest and stays there. I felt tears slide down my face before I realized I was crying. The cold air made them burn. Margaret reached out and took my hand. Her palm was warm, her grip firm, the way someone holds you when they're trying to keep you from drifting too far into your own pain. "I thought I was protecting her," she said quietly. "I thought if I stayed calm, if I didn't interfere, if I just prayed hard enough, things would get better. But love without courage is just fear wearing a pretty mask." I squeezed her hand back, unable to speak. The world around us seemed to fade, the garden, the trees, the frozen pond. All I could hear was the wind and her voice. After a long pause, she turned to me and said, almost in a whisper, "Sometimes, Helen, loving someone means speaking, even when your voice trembles." That sentence cut through the numbness inside me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I wanted to answer her, but no words came. Only the sound of my own breathing, uneven and fragile. When we finally stood to leave, the wind had softened. The sky above the garden was beginning to warm, a thin streak of gold breaking through the gray. Margaret smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Write something again," she said as we parted near the path. "You used to write beautifully, remember? You always said words could make sense of the pain." I watched her walk away until she disappeared behind the glass doors of the west wing. Then I turned back toward my room, her words echoing in my head. Inside, the hallway felt warmer than before. I walked slowly, my reflection passing through the polished floors and pale light. When I reached my room, I sat down by the small wooden desk near the window. The journal lay there, still open from the night I arrived. The page was blank. I had stared at it many times, but never written a word. My pen rested beside it, untouched. For a long while, I simply looked at the empty space on the paper. Then I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly, the weight of years pressing against my fingers. The first drop of ink touched the page. "I will not stay silent anymore." I wrote it once, then again. The second time, the words came out steadier. Outside, the light had turned to gold, spilling across the snow like a soft flame. The garden glowed faintly in the distance. The wind had stopped. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace, Not relief, but resolve. A quiet, deliberate kind of courage. I closed the journal gently and whispered to the empty room, Leah, Emily, and the woman I once was. None of us will fall from silence again. It was late afternoon when I took the taxi into the city. The streets were still wet from last night's rain, reflecting light like thin silver lines stretching across the pavement. Boston always looked colder in winter. Sharp angles of glass, people walking fast, not seeing each other. I watched the buildings pass through the window and thought of all the things that had gone unspoken in my life. Mr. Lewis's office was tucked between two old banks downtown. The sign was small and discreet, as if it didn't want to attract attention. Inside, it smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Books lined the walls, thick, leather-bound, their spines worn from decades of being opened and closed over the same kind of stories. Stories of harm, defense, consequence. When he saw me, he stood up slowly, his face lighting with recognition. "Helen Gardner," he said warmly. "It's been what, 30 years?" "Closer to 40, I smiled. "You haven't changed, Lewis?" He laughed. "That's not true. I've just aged into my face." His humor faded as he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "You said it was important. Sit. Tell me everything." The words came easier than I thought they would. I told him about the move, the apartment, the sound of water at 2 a.m, Emily's bruises, the silence that filled that house thicker than air. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that for one lifetime. He listened without interrupting, only occasionally taking notes. When I finished, there was a long pause. He removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a habit I remembered from our school days, something he did when he was thinking carefully. "What you're describing," he said finally, "is abuse. Physical, emotional, coercive. It's not just wrong, Helen, it's criminal." "I know. And your son?" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "He has a daughter, doesn't he?" "Sophie," I said softly. 9 years old." He sighed. "Then we have to move carefully. The goal isn't confrontation, it's documentation. Truth doesn't need anger, it needs evidence." That night, we began to plan. Lewis explained how everything needed to be done, clean, safe, legal. He showed me a small digital recorder, no larger than a lipstick tube. "Emily can keep this in her coat pocket. It activates automatically when it detects raised voices. The files are timestamped and stored in the cloud." He took out another sheet of paper outlining the next steps. Photos. She needs to document every mark, every bruise. Natural light, neutral background. No filters. The date must be visible in the metadata. I nodded, writing everything down carefully, like a student again. "And what about safety?" "That's the hard part," he said. "If she's caught, he'll know she's preparing to leave. She'll need a safe contact point, a friend maybe, or—" "Me," I said. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You, then. But Helen, you have to understand what this means. Once this starts, it can't stop halfway. She'll need to commit." I met his gaze, steady. "So will I." Later that evening, I called Emily from the nursing home's private line. Her voice was faint, almost a whisper. "Mom?" "It's me," I said gently. "I spoke to someone, a lawyer, an old friend I trust." Silence. Then a soft intake of breath. "What does that mean?" "It means we can help you," I said. "But you'll have to be brave. We'll need proof, not for revenge, but for protection. For Sophie." Her voice broke slightly. "He checks my phone, my emails. I can't." "I'll help you set up something he can't reach," I said. "An encrypted account. Lewis will walk us through it. You'll send everything there. Photos, recordings, notes. He'll store it safely." I could hear her breathing fast, the fear tightening every word. "And if he finds out?" "If he does," I said quietly, "you'll have somewhere to go, and he'll have nowhere left to hide." A week later, I visited her again under the pretense of a doctor's appointment. Sophie was home from school early that day, sitting on the living room floor with her iPad. She ran to hug me, smiling in that effortless way only children can. When Michael stepped out to take a call, I knelt beside her and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Sophie," I said softly, "can I ask you something important?" She nodded, curious. "If you ever hear your dad shouting at your mom, really loud, so you know she's scared, I want you to take your iPad, step into the hallway, and turn the camera on. Don't say anything. Don't move close. Just stay where you are and let it record. Can you do that for me? Her eyes widened. Like a secret mission? I smiled faintly. Yes, but it's not to hurt anyone. It's to help. Okay, she said seriously. I can do that. I kissed her forehead. Good girl. That night, the three of us, me, Emily, and Louis, on speakerphone, spoke quietly over the secure line. The plan was simple, but every detail mattered. Louis, you'll need to back up everything twice. Photos go to the encrypted drive. Recordings too. I'll store copies in a private archive. Helen will get duplicate keys. Emily. And if he checks my phone? Louis. Use the old one we discussed. Keep it hidden. Plug it in once a week to sync. If he finds it, deny it's yours. Helen. We're not fighting him, Emily. We're saving what's left of him. The part that can still face the truth. Emily's voice trembled. And if I fail? I paused. My hand was trembling slightly, but my voice stayed steady. Then I'll continue. Until there's nothing left to hide behind. The line went quiet. I could hear Emily crying softly, on the other end. Louis broke the silence. Tomorrow, you'll both get everything you need. And Helen, make sure you're safe too. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I've lived afraid long enough, I said. It's time the fear changed addresses, not me. When the call ended, I sat by the window in my small room at St. Anne's. The lights of the city glimmered faintly in the distance. Somewhere out there, behind those glass towers, the water was still running. But this time, it no longer sounded like guilt. It sounded like resolve. Like truth washing itself clean. The night it finally happened, the air in Boston felt heavier than usual, thick with the promise of a storm. The city lights shimmered through a thin mist, reflecting off the wet streets like small, trembling fires. Inside Silver Heights, behind the tinted glass of the 18th floor, another kind of storm was building. Emily had been quiet all day. She had waited until Sophie was asleep, her backpack zipped and hidden under the bed, packed with a few clothes, a toy rabbit, and her mother's worn passport. Emily moved like someone performing a rehearsed routine, her hands shaking only when she touched the suitcase handle. When Michael walked in that evening, his tie still tight, his face still calm, she met him at the door. For once, she didn't smile. I'm leaving, Michael, she said quietly. I want a divorce. The words landed in the air like a crack of glass. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he laughed, a sound without humor. You're not serious. I am, she said, her voice firmer now. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm taking Sophie. This ends tonight. The silence stretched, then broke. You're not walking out of this house, he said, his tone low, shaking with something darker than anger. I am. His hand struck the table hard enough to rattle the glassware. You think you can ruin me? You think you can take my daughter and destroy my name? Emily stepped back. You destroyed it yourself, Michael. The slap came fast, not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to make her head snap to the side. A plate slid from the counter and shattered. Sophie woke up. She stood in the doorway, frozen. The rabbit fell from her hands. Emily turned sharply, voice trembling. Go, baby, go to your room. But Michael was shouting again, louder now, the words tangled with rage. You think you can embarrass me? Make me look weak? Emily grabbed Sophie's arm, pulling her toward the hallway. Michael followed, his footsteps heavy, the sound of his breathing sharp. The apartment, once spotless, now echoed with chaos. Furniture scraping, a vase breaking, the clatter of metal on tile. Emily ran into the bathroom and locked the door. Water burst from the shower as she twisted the handle. Instinct, not reason. A noise to drown his voice, to fill the silence with something else. Across town, in her quiet room at St. Anne's, Helen was writing when the phone rang. The sound startled her. No one called this late. She picked it up, her heart already beating too fast. Hello? Static. Then a faint voice. Mom. It was Emily, breathless, broken, her words cracked by interference. He knows the files. He found out. Sophie's here. Then a crash. A sharp, muffled cry. The line went dead. Emily? Emily? Nothing. Only silence. Helen stood, the pen falling from her hand. Her body moved on instinct, years of quiet. Fear giving way to something fierce, unthinking. She reached for her coat, the journal still open on the table. The last line written that morning. I will not stay silent anymore. She called Louis first. Her voice was trembling, but her words were clear. It's happening. He's hurting her. Now. I'm calling the police, he said immediately. Stay where you are, Helen. I'll come get you. No, she said, I'm coming with you. 10 minutes later, his car pulled up in front of St. Anne's. The roads were slick, the rain starting again, turning the world into streaks of red and white light. The sirens came soon after. Faint at first, then louder. Filling the night with urgency, they drove fast through the city. Helen's hands gripped the edge of the seat. Every light they passed felt like a heartbeat, flashing against the glass. Green, yellow, red, blue. Meanwhile, inside the apartment, the scene had devolved into chaos. Michael pounded on the locked door, shouting her name. Emily, open the door right now. The water ran harder, spilling onto the floor, soaking the hallway carpet. Emily held Sophie close, her phone clutched in her other hand. It's okay, she whispered. Just stay quiet. It's almost over. Sophie was crying softly. I'm scared, Mommy. I know, baby, I know. Then Sophie remembered. The mission. Grandma's voice in her head. If you ever hear your dad shouting, take the iPad into the hallway and turn on the camera. She slipped from her mother's arms, crouched by the door, and slid the iPad under the small gap. The red light blinked once, then steady. The recording began. The lens captured fragments, Michael's feet pacing, the shadow of his hands slamming the door, water flooding out onto the tiles. His voice filled the room, sharp and broken. You made me do this. You ruined everything. Then came the sirens. Blue and red lights began to flicker across the glass walls, slicing through the rain. The pounding stopped. Michael turned toward the sound, confusion, then panic. Emily, he hissed. Wow, what did you do? The banging on the front door was louder now. Boston police, open up. Michael froze. For a moment, the house fell completely silent except for the sound of running water. Then he took a step back, as if realizing something he couldn't undo. When the officers burst in, the hallway was a pool of water. The reflection of flashing lights rippled across the tiles. Emily was still holding Sophie in the bathroom doorway. Michael stood in the middle of the living room, his face pale, his hands raised slightly, not in surrender, but in disbelief. The officers surrounded him quickly. The metallic click of handcuffs broke the silence. Helen arrived moments later, breathless, the rain soaking her coat. Lewis was behind her, speaking to an officer at the door. She moved past them into the apartment that now looked nothing like the place she had left, the cold perfection shattered by water and light. Emily saw her and began to cry. Not loudly, not with sound, just the soft, exhausted kind of crying that comes when fear finally has somewhere to go. Helen reached her, wrapping her arms around both her daughter-in-law and granddaughter. Sophie buried her face into her grandmother's shoulder. It's over, Helen whispered. It's over now. The sirens outside began to fade. The lights still pulsed faintly through the windows, blue and red shimmering across the wet floor, reflections of a night that would never leave them. That night, I would later write in my journal, the sound of water changed forever. It no longer meant fear or guilt. It meant cleansing. It meant truth. The police station was quieter than Helen expected, the kind of quiet that comes after chaos, when everything dangerous has already happened but its echo still lingers in the air. Outside, the rain had stopped. Drops clung to the window, catching the early light of dawn like tiny pieces of glass. Helen sat in a small interview room, her coat still damp, her hands clasped tightly around a flash drive. The white noise from the fluorescent lights above filled the silence. Across from her sat a young detective, kind eyes, steady voice, the kind of person who had seen too much and learned how to stay calm through it. You said you had something we should see, he said gently. Helen nodded, her fingers trembling as she pushed the flash drive across the table. It was recorded by my granddaughter, she said quietly. She's 9. Please, handle it carefully. The detective inserted the drive into his laptop. The video opened instantly, grainy, handheld, the image shaking as the iPad rested on the floor. The timestamp flickered in the corner. 02:07 a.m. At first there was only sound, running water, footsteps, the muffled voice of a man shouting through the door. Then came the crash. A glass breaking, a child's faint cry. Helen looked away, but even with her eyes closed she could hear everything. The sharp slap, the sound of something hitting the floor, Michael's voice breaking through the static, distorted but unmistakable. You made me do this? You think you can walk away from me? The detective turned the volume down. He glanced at her, but she didn't move. "I don't need to watch it," she said softly. "I was there, just not in the same room." He hesitated, then pressed pause. The screen froze. Michael's shadow caught mid-motion, blurred by water and chaos. "This is enough," the detective said, his tone professional, but there was something human beneath it, a quiet sadness. "We'll add it to the report. It confirms everything. Thank you, Mrs. Gardner." Helen exhaled slowly, the air leaving her lungs like something she had been holding for years. A few hours later, she stood in the hallway outside the holding cells. Through the glass partition, she saw her son. Michael sat on a metal bench, his head down, his hands cuffed in front of him. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his tie gone. The light above him flickered weakly, washing the color from his face. For a long moment, Helen didn't move. She remembered the boy he once was, the one who used to run barefoot through the backyard, chasing fireflies, his laughter bright and endless. The same boy who once cried when he thought he'd hurt a bird with a slingshot. That boy was gone. What sat before her now was a man hollowed out by anger, pride, and something she would never be able to name. Michael looked up suddenly, as if sensing her presence. Their eyes met through the glass. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Helen stepped closer, her voice calm, steady, quiet enough that only she could hear it. "Do you remember what your father used to say?" She murmured, "That water washes away everything." Her gaze hardened. He was wrong. It can wash away dirt, blood, lies, but not guilt. Never guilt. Michael lowered his head again. The officer beside her spoke softly. "He'll be transferred soon. Domestic assault, false imprisonment, endangerment of a minor. It's a serious case." Helen nodded, her face unreadable. "It should be." Outside the station, the sun was rising. The clouds had thinned and the light broke through, reflecting off the wet pavement. The city was slowly waking up, people hurrying past, unaware of the story that had ended just hours earlier. Louis was waiting for her near the car, holding a cup of coffee. He didn't say much, just handed it to her with a small nod. "It's done," he said. Helen took the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. For the first time in a long while, her hands didn't shake. She looked up at the faint blue sky. "It's strange," she said softly, "when you spend your life afraid of water, of what it hides, of what it remembers, and then one day, it's just quiet." Louis studied her for a moment. "Quiet can be good." Helen smiled faintly. "Quiet can be honest." Later that morning, as she returned to St. Anne's, she stopped by the garden. The fountain, once frozen, was flowing again. The water caught the sunlight, scattering it in small, bright circles across the stones. She sat on the bench where she used to meet Margaret, opened her journal and wrote slowly, each word deliberate, her handwriting steadier than it had been in years. There are things time cannot erase, but truth can stop them from growing. She paused, then added another line beneath it. Water can cleanse, but it cannot forgive. Helen closed the journal, resting her hand over the cover. The breeze carried the faint sound of flowing water, steady, endless, almost peaceful. Somewhere behind her, a church bell rang 9 times. The day had begun, and for the first time in her life, it began clean. The courtroom was cold that morning, not from temperature, but from tension, the kind that sits in the air before judgment, when every sound feels too loud and every silence feels too long. The walls were pale gray, the kind that didn't belong to any time or feeling. Helen sat in the second row, hands clasped in her lap. Beside her was Louis, calm and composed, his notes stacked neatly before him. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table, her eyes fixed on the wooden surface, lips pressed tight together. Across the aisle, Michael looked the same as always. Pressed suit, clean haircut, the practiced posture of a man used to being in control. But there was a stiffness to his movements now. His fingers drummed against the table, small, impatient, defensive. When the judge entered, the room rose. The sound of chairs scraping the floor echoed like the start of something irreversible. The questioning began. Michael's lawyer spoke first, smooth, polished, rehearsed. "Your Honor," he said, "my client, Mr. Gardner, has been wrongly accused. What we are witnessing here is not justice, but the tragic consequence of confusion, of an elderly woman's misinterpretation, and a wife's emotional instability." Helen's jaw tightened. The lawyer continued, each word sharpened for effect. "Mrs. Helen Gardner is 75. Her memory has been affected by years of medication. Her recollection of events cannot be trusted. What she perceives as abuse could very well be frustration, stress, normal marital conflict exaggerated by her failing health. He gestured toward Michael, who lowered his head slightly, a picture of restrained grief. My client is a devoted son. He took his mother in, cared for her, provided her with comfort. And this, he said, sweeping his hand toward the prosecution table, is how she repays him, by destroying his life with false accusations. Lewis rose slowly. His tone was calm but cutting, the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Your Honor, we could spend hours debating perception. But perception doesn't scream. It doesn't slap. It doesn't bleed. Evidence does. He nodded to the technician in the back. The lights dimmed slightly. The screen on the wall flickered to life. The video began. Shaky, faintly grainy, Sophie's small hands framing the chaos of that night. First the sound of running water, then Michael's voice, raw and unfiltered. You made me do this. You think you can leave me? The slap followed, clear, undeniable. The gasp that came after silenced the entire room. No one moved. Even the air seemed to stop. Helen closed her eyes, her breath shallow but steady. When the clip ended, the only sound was Emily's quiet sobbing. Lewis placed a hand over her shoulder without looking away from the judge. That, he said softly, is not confusion. That is not stress. That is violence. The defense tried to object, but their words faltered under the weight of what had just been seen. The judge leaned forward, expression unreadable. Mrs. Gardner, she said finally, would you like to speak? Helen hesitated, then stood. Her knees trembled, but her voice, though quiet, carried through the entire room. When I was young, she began, I stayed silent when my husband hurt me. I told myself I was keeping the peace, that I was protecting my son. She turned toward Michael, her eyes steady, her voice gaining strength with every word. But silence doesn't protect anyone. It just teaches cruelty how to breathe. Her next words came slower, heavier. I let it happen once. I will not let it happen again. Not to another woman, not under my roof, and not from my blood. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the judge's pen had stopped moving. When the verdict came, it was quiet, almost gentle, but final. Michael Gardner, this court finds you guilty of domestic abuse, unlawful confinement, and child endangerment. You are hereby sentenced to serve a custodial term of 5 years, with mandatory psychological counseling. Emily pressed a hand to her face, tears spilling freely now, not of grief, but of release. Lewis exhaled softly beside her, a rare hint of relief in his composed face. Helen didn't move, her gaze remained fixed on her son. As the bailiff approached, Michael stood. The mask of composure cracked, revealing something hollow underneath. Disbelief, betrayal, rage, that had nowhere left to go. When the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he finally looked at her. His voice was low, shaking. You've destroyed me, Mother. You've killed your own son. Helen's answer came barely above a whisper, but it carried through the room like a final bell. No, she said. I saved you from the man you became. As Michael was led away, the morning light poured through the tall windows, spilling across the floor like water. The judge left the bench, the court slowly emptied, and the sound of footsteps faded down the hall. Emily turned to Helen, eyes red, voice trembling. You did it, she whispered. Helen shook her head gently. We did it. Outside, the wind had softened. The city was bright, quiet, and clean, the kind of light that doesn't erase what happened, but lets you see it clearly. Helen tilted her face toward the sun, breathing in the cold air. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel the weight of silence pressing on her chest. Inside her mind, one line repeated, not in pain, but in peace. Justice doesn't undo the past. It simply makes the future possible. Spring had finally come to Vermont. The long silence of winter had melted away, leaving behind the soft hum of water flowing under bridges, the smell of damp earth, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. At the edge of town, a small wooden building stood beneath the budding maple trees. Its windows were covered with hand-painted flowers, and a white sign by the door read, Little Harbor Preschool. Inside, Emily was arranging toys on low shelves while Sophie painted at a small table near the window. Her brush moved carefully, dipping into blue, then green, then yellow. The canvas slowly filled with color, 2 figures beneath an umbrella, one tall, one small, both smiling as rain fell around them. Emily leaned over her daughter's shoulder. "Who's that, sweetheart?" Sophie grinned, her cheeks streaked with faint smudges of paint. "That's you and Grandma," she said proudly. "I called it Grandma and the Rain." Emily felt something warm rise in her chest. Pride, gratitude, a quiet ache that had finally learned to breathe again. She kissed her daughter's hair and whispered, "She'll love it." A few hours later, mother and daughter drove down a narrow road lined with birch trees until the white brick walls of St. Anne's came into view. The retirement home looked different in the spring, less like a place of endings, more like one of peace. Helen sat by the window of her room, her wheelchair turned toward the light. The air smelled faintly of lavender and rain. On the small oak table beside her lay a thick stack of papers, the final printed proof of her memoir. The title in clean serif letters read, "The Night of Water." Her hands rested over the cover, the same way one might rest a hand over a wound that had finally scarred. There was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she said, her voice warm but frail. Emily and Sophie stepped inside, the smell of wet grass following them. "Look what we brought," Emily said softly, placing a freshly printed copy of The Night of Water on the table. It was the first one from the publisher, clean, crisp, smelling faintly of ink and paper. Helen traced the cover with her fingertips, her eyes shining faintly with pride and disbelief. "It's real," she murmured. "After all these years, it's real." Sophie climbed onto her lap, holding out her painting. "I made this, Grandma. It's us. In the rain." Helen looked at the picture, two figures under a bright yellow umbrella, the raindrops drawn as soft silver lines. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then slowly she smiled. "It's beautiful, darling." Sophie tilted her head. "Do you still hate the rain, Grandma?" Helen looked out the window. Beyond the glass, the world was bathed in gold and gray, sunlight catching on raindrops that fell gently across the garden. Each drop shone for a second before disappearing into the earth. "No," Helen said softly, "not anymore." She turned back to Sophie, her voice trembling but full of warmth. "The rain used to frighten me. It reminded me of pain and silence. But now I think it's just water finding its way home." Emily reached for her hand. "You gave it meaning again." Helen's eyes softened. "No, Emily, you did. You turned fear into life." For a long while, the three of them sat together, the sound of the rain steady but kind, the kind that didn't hide anything or demand to be feared. As the afternoon light faded, Helen opened her journal for what she knew would be the last time. The page was nearly full, her handwriting a little unsteady but clear. She began to write slowly, each stroke deliberate, as if engraving the words into the page itself. That night, the water did not just wash away sin. It carried away the fear that chained me for a lifetime. She set down the pen, the faintest smile on her lips. Behind her, Sophie was giggling softly as Emily tried to dry her small paint-stained hands. The laughter filled the room, a sound Helen had once believed would never return. Outside, the rain began to slow, turning into a soft drizzle that shimmered in the amber light of dusk. The garden below glistened, the flowers bending gently under the last drops. Helen looked out once more, her eyes reflecting the gold of the setting sun. Her breath came slow and steady, her hands still resting on the cover of her book. The Night of Water, the story of pain, silence, and the courage it takes to break both. Sophie's small voice broke the quiet one last time. "Grandma," she said, "the rain isn't scary anymore." Helen smiled, her eyes warm, her face lit by the soft glow of the window. "No, my dear," she whispered. "It never was. We just had to listen long enough to hear what it was really saying." Outside, a single droplet slid down the glass, slow, certain, and disappeared into the light.